Okay, this morning we're in part 3 of Hebrews chapter 11, and we're taking up our study in verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. Okay, Isaac is the second in line from Abraham, his father. He was a promised child, and we find that he was willing to be submissive to his father when he was directed to offer up his son. And it says he blessed Jacob and Esau. We know the blessing that he gave to his sons was the blessing that was given to his father Abraham. And that blessing was, and he was the fulfillment, the first step in the fulfillment of that blessing, that through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac would be in line, a descendant in line through which the Messiah would come. Because the whole focus of the Bible is the solution to the sin problem. And the solution was promised there in the Garden of Eden when that first lamb was sacrificed. That it was a symbol of a Messiah that would come. And from Eve onward, every mother anticipated that her child would be that Messiah. That was their anchor. That was their hope. And this is called a blessing. Not a blessing fulfilled in their lifetime, but it was a blessing that was certain that a Messiah would come. And so a blessing is, when you receive a blessing, it's something to rejoice over. It's something to be anticipated, appreciated, enjoyed. Blessing is always something that's delightful. It may not appear to be delightful in the moment, and that's what we find in life itself, that many of the apparently cruel moments of life are the greatest blessing. Because we think that we are in a situation where we're happy to be. We don't want anything to change. We're quite happy with the way it is. Okay, we're just rearranging the deck chairs here, but we're back online. Okay, so Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. How does this relate to our life? What is the blessing that we are passing on? Have we received the blessing? What kind of blessing have you received from God? And are you living in that blessing that you want to pass it on to your children? Well, first of all, that blessing is the fact that God has a purpose in your life. God has a purpose for your life. He had a purpose for Abraham, and Abraham was simply to be the father of a nation. And he started out with a son that he thought would never come. So he tried to assist God himself. And we know the catastrophe that has created in this world, where his attempt created an entire nation of 12 sons like Jacob had. Ishmael had 12 sons, 12 tribes. And they became the avowed enemy of their relatives, of the promised of God, the called of God. What a situation for God to deal with. Here he calls a man, promises him a descendant, and because the promise is not fulfilled in the time in which he anticipates it should be fulfilled, he jumps in and attempts to fulfill it himself. And what a mess God has to deal with. Now there's 12 tribes of avowed enemies against this nation that God was going to call into existence to be a witness to the world of what life can be like when God is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Of the spiritual prosperity, the physical, material prosperity, the blessing, the joy, the delights of the Queen of Sheba. Could say, the half was not told me. Is that true? Is that true when people meet you? Do they go away saying, the half wasn't told me? I never realized what a beautiful, beautiful Christian and lover of God you are. You have not told me. I couldn't imagine it until I've seen it. That's the story that God wants the world to tell when they come and see. When people come to our church, they should leave saying, the half wasn't told me. It wasn't told me. I didn't imagine that there could be a people so in love with one another. The bonds of fellowship, the delights of this family that is just everywhere. Everybody is a lover of everybody. And they see that love demonstrated in so many different ways because they now are the subject of that love. And they are so impressed, so drawn into this love that they don't want to leave. See, church evangelism is not indoctrinating people. It's loving people, demonstrating the very character of God that compels people to make a choice. That's evangelism. And Abraham messed up big time. Big time. How many times do we do that? Instead of waiting on God and trusting God, we mess it up because we want it now. And we think that it's just like in our own character. Instead of trusting God to take up residence in us and invite him to do that and trust him to do that, we go about trying to shape our own character, improve ourselves, sin less, be a better Christian, all by our effort. When God has already made the promise that he would come and dwell in us and that he would take our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh. He's already told us he would do that. But we, in our zealous impatience to be good people, godly people, we mess it up. And so when people come to our church, they see that, here are all these fundamental doctrines, all these teachings. And if I learn these teachings, if I jump through these hoops, if I keep the commandments of God, if I keep the Sabbath, nothing wrong. It's just the fact that it's wrong because we are attempting to do what God has promised to do. That's the wrong. And yet here we have Isaac. He's born out of this, in spite of Abraham's attempts. And we know the foibles and the fears of Abraham lying twice about his beautiful, beautiful wife. Fearful. Does God love him any less? Does he love you any less when you mess up? No. But he doesn't want our help. We're constantly getting in the way of God. Instead of trusting him, we're attempting to do what God alone can do. You cannot give birth to a new creation. You cannot be that new creation that God promised. That if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. God has to do it. And when we start looking to God and trusting him, then life takes on a new dimension. The struggle, the fight, the battle, it's gone. And a storm, instead of a storm of emotions and effort and determination, it's now, he leads me beside the still waters. You know, a sheep will never drink moving water. Sheep are very afraid of water. You get that in their wool and they'd sink like a man with an overcoat trying to swim in a storm. God says, I will make you lie down in green pastures. It's a matter of trusting God, but we have to come to that point. That's what life is all about. It's coming to the point of trusting God, that he will do it. And that he will do it comes down to the fact that God has fulfilled. We look back. These men were looking forward, but we look back and we see that the Lamb did come. The Messiah did arrive on time. And all the characteristics of Isaiah and the other prophets, Micah, Amos, were fulfilled perfectly. So we draw our strength from the fact that God is faithful. God is trustworthy. He will do what he has promised. So Isaac, the promised child, is now passing on this blessing that the Messiah will come. And for us, the application of this promised blessing now is that just as he was the promised child, he was the miracle child. And through him, an entire nation that were as the sands of the sea would come. And so now we, after that event, that this miracle birth will take place in us as it did in Sarah, as it did in Mary. That this Messiah will come and take up residence in us, because that's the purpose of his coming, that he might restore us to his family, that this tragic interlude of sin would have an end. What kind of blessing are you passing on to your children? Are you assuring them that God has a place for them? God has a work, a plan for their life, and if they will just choose to be a child of God and to trust him, that he will do all the work. But they can easily mess up their life when they try and do it on their own. Isaac is that example of faith. He had to trust God too, and that's the blessing here is the evidence of that trust in the promise made to his father. That there would be a great nation, that through that nation the Messiah would come. And here was a man who was willing to sacrifice his life, trusting that God had spoken to his father. How often did Abraham discuss and share his experiences with God, with his son? It must have been often, as he told of meeting, how they came that day, and he invited these strangers to his home, prepared a meal for them. Incredible. Over and over he told that story. And Isaac believed. And so now he passes on that blessing. Do you assure your children that God wants to be born in them and that he will be? That they can be a child of God right now. They're called to be a child of God. That God has a plan and a purpose for their life. And that may not be what you anticipate. Life may take turns and circumstances that we don't even want to experience. But it's necessary for the will of God to be fulfilled perfectly in order for his plan to be fulfilled. So there's some of the lessons that we can learn from Isaac. It says, bless Jacob. Jacob. What are some of the strengths and the accomplishments and the weaknesses and mistakes of this man? First of all, Jacob's life had 4 stages. And each was marked by a personal encounter with God. In the first stage, Jacob lived up to his name, which means he grasped the heel. Figuratively, it means he deceives. He grabbed Esau's heel at birth. By the time he had fled from home, he had also grabbed his brother's birthright and blessing. During his flight, God first appeared to him. While he's running, because of his deception, that's when God comes and reveals himself. And not only did God confirm to Jacob his blessing, but he awakened in Jacob a personal knowledge of himself. In the second stage, Jacob's experienced life from the other side, being manipulated and deceived by Laban. And it's here that there is a curious change. Jacob of stage 1 would simply have left Laban, whereas the Jacob of stage 2, after deciding to leave, waited 6 years for God's permission. In the third stage, Jacob was in a new role as a grabber. This time, by the Jordan River, he grabbed onto God and wouldn't let go. He realized his dependence on the God who would continue to bless him. His relationship to God became essential to his life, and his name was changed to Israel, which means he struggles with God. Jacob's last stage of life was to be grabbed. God achieved a firm hold on him. In response to Joseph's invitation to come to Egypt, Jacob was clearly unwilling to make a move without God's approval. So God puts him in this lineup of the greats of faith. Faith, the surrender of mind, will, and emotion to the will of God. That's what God is seeking to do in each of our lives. And Jacob represents to us our own experiences. We want to grab, we want to take, we want this character of God. We want this perfect life of Jesus Christ. but we already possess what we want. Instead of seeking to attain it and to achieve it and to be overcomers and victorious Christians, it's already ours. It is already ours. Perfect, complete, through the promised Messiah. What a difference it makes in life when you discover that the very thing that you want, your heart pants after, you desire more than anything else, that you possessed it all the time, was already yours. But you were attempting it in your strength. You didn't believe that it was yours. It's like the disciples when they were told by the women returning from the open grave there in Gethsemane. Can't be for real. It's just not true. It's not true. So that's how most Christians live their life. It's not true. It can't be. And yet it is. Yeah, it is. So how are you living your life today? Are you working to victory, or are you working from victory? Are you working from perfect and complete to perfect and complete? Are you trusting God to do what only He can do and has already done for you? Are you still in the anticipation stage that one day it will happen? One day I will be. One day I can say with confidence, every day is a life without sin. Not because I'm perfect, but because now I am resting totally and confidently that God is in residence in me and His life is perfect and complete, and I choose to remain in that relationship with Him, unbroken, refusing to ever step out of the will of God, because that's our choice. Every word you speak, every action of your life is by informed choice. The devil can't make you say one word. He can't make you do one thing. It's your choice. What kind of thoughts are you associating with? Are you entertaining? Are you allowing the devil to suggest thoughts in your mind of doubt, of fear, that you have not yet achieved this, that it's not possible? Are you living in faith? Are you rejoicing in the promises of God that are just as sure and certain as the promise was to Abraham that he would have a son? Faith steps up and says it's real, it's true, and I'm going to live that life. Not in my strength, but by the invitation of the Spirit of God to live it in me and through me. What a thrill to know that you are already victorious. That you would never dare insult God by saying, I'm just human, I can't overcome, therefore that justifies that word, that action. No. I'm no longer just human. That old human died on the cross with Christ. I can say that with confidence because the Word says it. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, not I live, but Christ lives in me. Not I, but Christ lives in me. By choice. That life is mine by choice. And that is the blessing that Isaac passed on to Jacob, and Jacob passed on to his 12 sons. That's the life that God is calling us. That's the blessing that He wants us to be in our generation. That we become a living testimony. That our churches become a beacon of light, of hope. When people enter the doors of our church, they don't want to leave. Is that your experience? Is that the kind of love that you encounter in your church? That's what God intends it to be. But God begins with a person. Just you. You in your relationship with God. So, Jacob was the father of 12 sons of Israel, 12 tribes. He was determined and willing to work long and hard for what he wanted. Are we? What are we working long and hard for? To stay in that relationship with God. That's all God asks of us. He just wants a relationship with us. That's why the Sabbath is the supreme test. Are you willing to come and rest in me? All day, every day. Are you willing to then to be estranged from the world by choosing to worship on a day that the world does not honor, nor respect, nor accept as the true day of worshiping the Creator God? See, everything we do is a message to the world. Every word you speak, every action, how you dress, how you eat, everything about you, the car you drive, everything is a message. And so our message is derived from knowing that whatever word we speak, whatever we do, like with Abraham, he wouldn't move and Israel out in the wilderness. They moved only as God directed, so that everything in our life is only like Jacob. He wasn't going to go down to Egypt unless he knew that it was God's will. So everything we do is always predicated on the fact that we know that what we're going to say and what we're going to do, what we're going to buy, where we're going to go, is the will of God. These men learned that lesson. They had to learn it many times in a hard way. But they learned the lesson. And it says, by faith, Joseph, when he went out, by faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning the bones. Doesn't say much about Joseph, does it? Doesn't mention his role in Egypt and anything else, but here is the highlight. It says, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. What does this have to do with us? Well, let's look at Joseph just a minute. We know that because of the dreams that he had and the stories that his father had told him, he was overconfident. His natural self-assurance increased by being Jacob's favorite son and by knowing of God's design on his life was unbearable to his 10 older brothers, who eventually conspired against him. But this self-assurance, molded by pain and combined with a personal knowledge of God, allowed him to survive and prosper where most would have failed. He added quiet wisdom to his confidence and won the hearts of everyone he met. Potiphar, the prison warden, other prisoners, the Pharaoh, and after many years, even those 10 brothers. Think of the life of Joseph. He had confidence that God had a purpose for his life. Remember the blessing that had been passed on to Jacob from his father Isaac was passed on to this favorite son. Why was he favorite? Because he was the most receptive to his father's love, most interested in his father's stories and experiences that he shared with his sons. But Joseph was always sitting at his father's feet. He was the closest. And we would naturally gravitate, and our affection, our attention would focus on our children who were most receptive to our love and to those things which were significant and important and valuable to us that we wanted to pass on to them. And God had a purpose for Joseph. He gave him an assertive heart and confidence and self-assurance that were necessary to stand when everything was against him. That no matter what opposition came against him, he could stand alone, trusting that God, the promises that his father had shared with him of this God who was trustworthy, would be with him. And we know that when he was sold the first time, and he was going south and past those hills of which he could not see his father's tents, but he knew were there in the distance over those hills, he determined that he would be faithful to God, the God of his father. Do our children have the same faith in God that we have? Are we passing that on to them, that God is trustworthy, that God has a purpose and a plan for our life, and that no matter what happens, be faithful to God? You think back of Abraham's experience. He gave one son to God, and God gave him so many descendants that you couldn't number them, like the sand of the sea. Can you grasp that for just a moment? That no matter what we give in this world, no matter what we may be called to give up, God wants to multiply it in the same exponential degree as he did the descendants of Abraham when he gave his one son, was willing. Any possession, anything in this world is trivial. It's trivial, it's worthless. It's only momentary compared to the blessings of eternity. And for whatever we give here, or we think we're giving here, we're only emptying our hands to receive blessings that we cannot hold. There's not room enough to receive them. And when we get to heaven, that's why we will forget this world. It's nothing. People get so caught up on the things of this world, the possessions of this world, the experiences and the delights and the privileges, and when it's nothing. It's just soap bubbles. But here was a young man, sold twice. But he was never, ever moved from his position of faithfulness to God. No matter what happened, he was a man of integrity. No matter what temptation came his way, he was true to God. Do our children see that in us? That quiet determination, that quiet wisdom and confidence that God is trustworthy, that no matter what comes to us, stand faithful to God. Don't surrender your faith and trust in God, even if it costs you your life. Abraham learned that lesson, that painful, painful lesson that God never intended for him, but because of his lack of faith, God had to put him to a test. that none of us have ever faced. At last, Abraham was willing to give because he knew that what he gave, he would receive back multiple fold. Wherever Joseph went, whatever he did, whatever his circumstances were, he proved himself trustworthy. He proved himself trustworthy. He was not interested in himself. He had a genuine interest in those around him. Everything he did was for the benefit of the others. It was not about himself and stepping on others to get to a higher position. The love of God was in his heart, and he won the hearts of the people. He won the heart of Pharaoh. Perhaps you can identify with some of the hardships that he went through, that he experienced. He was betrayed. You ever been betrayed? I have. Deserted by his family. Exposed to sexual temptation. And punished for doing the right thing. Punished for doing the right thing. Then he had to endure a long imprisonment. Forgotten by those he helped. As you read his story, you see what Joseph did in each case. His positive response transformed each setback into a step forward. He didn't spend much time asking why. His approach, what shall I do now? What shall I do now? He didn't commiserate. He didn't complain. He didn't accuse. Those who met Joseph were aware that wherever he went and whatever he did, God was with him. So when you're facing a setback, the beginning of a Joseph-like attitude is to acknowledge that God is with you. There's nothing like this, like his presence to shed new light on a dark situation. So what are some of the strengths that we gather from this man of faith? He rose in power from slave to ruler of Egypt, was known for his personal integrity, was a man of spiritual sensitivity, prepared a nation to survive a famine. And the lessons we learn from that is no matter what matters is not so much the events or circumstances of life, but how we respond to them. With God's help, any situation can be used for good even when others intend it for evil. Now, we find here that he specifically says that they are to take his bones when they leave. So here, for number one, there is a promise, an assurance that they would leave. They would leave Egypt. He was aware of the promise that was given to Abraham, the assurance that they would go down to Egypt, that they would come up out of Egypt. You see a parallel between Joseph and us? It says, take up his bones. You know, God's coming for our bones, and before he takes us to the heavenly Canaan, he's going to come and take our bones. There's going to be a resurrection. Yep. There's going to be a resurrection. He's going to take your bones. He's going to take the new you to the new heavenly Canaan. What an assurance. What an assurance. There's one other thing I wanted that I didn't catch right here. In verse 21 with Jacob, it says he was blessed. He blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped leaning on the top of his staff. Well, that's an interesting phrase there, because in the Jerome translation, which was a very, very, very poor translation, which the Catholic Church accepted as their official translation, which the biblical scholars, Hebrew and Greek, all accepted that there were over 8,000 errors in that translation. And in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 21, our translation says, and he worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. Well, in the Jerome translation, it says he worshipped the top of his staff. And from that one phrase, the Catholic Church justified image worship. From that one mistranslation, the worship of idols was justified, verified, because it was in their 8,000 error translation. Why did they come up with that translation? Because they knew that the only way that they could overcome and outsmart the Protestants was to try and come up with a better translation. So they took this translation and touted it, advertised it as the best of the best translations of the Bible, knowing that it was the most faulty and full of error translations of any translation of the Bible. But that's how it was promoted. That's how it was accepted. It's been passed on from generation to generation. Very few corrections. Still there. So here are lessons that we can learn from these men of faith. When we look at Joseph's life and compare our life to it, are we willing to accept any circumstance and make something good of it instead of complaining about it and asking God to change it? See, God is not in the business of changing us. God is going to take what we are. He has made you what you are. And he demonstrates to the world that he can take what you are. No matter what mistakes. We look at Abraham. We look at Jacob. Isaac made no mistakes, and we skip a generation and we come to Joseph, and there is no error, there's no fault, there's no weakness in him. God can take what you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what mistakes you have made. God can turn it into blessing. God is not interested. He's interested in, what are you going to do this moment? Are you going to let me have all of you? Can I come in and live your life for you? Are you willing to allow me to do that? Are you willing to allow me to create circumstances that you don't understand? You think I've forgotten you. You think that I've stepped away from you, and now you're suffering under circumstances that are not godly. That, it's not a good thing. I want to change it. I want to get out of it. I want to escape it. God says, are you willing to stay in that prison and turn it into a land of blessing? Those prisoners under Joseph's care woke up every day anticipating the delights of another day. They never thought themselves as prisoners because he didn't treat them as prisoners. He treated them as people. And they loved him because he was interested in their welfare. He was not treating them according to their crime. He treated them as human beings deserving respect and rights. And they respected him. So no matter what your circumstances are, what our circumstances are, how are we going to respond to them? When we look back at the story of Joseph, we see the divine providence of God placing Joseph and allowing the circumstances of his life because God knew the outcome. Joseph could have never orchestrated his life. He never imagined the blessings and the privileges and the opportunities to be a blessing that God saw. But God has to put you in circumstances in order for you to be that blessing that may be very painful. Very painful. When he was punished for doing the right thing, for being a man of integrity, he was put in prison. But he didn't allow the circumstances to shape him. And that's what God asks of us today. Are you willing to be blessed? Are you willing to be a man of faith, a woman of faith today? Surrendering mind, will, and emotion to my will. Just being willing to accept for me to come and live my life in you and through you today. That you may lay your head on your pillow tonight knowing that not once did you rebel against the known will of God. Your mind was made up. You made a decision. Just as Joseph made that decision that he would be a man of integrity. He would not sacrifice his integrity for the gratification of a sexual desire of the one who was pursuing him. He made up his mind. And so we can make up our mind to choose God, to allow him, to give him the opportunity, because God cannot do it. He will not force his way into your life. But he is there constantly to appeal to you, to allow him to live his life in you and through you today. That's what God is waiting for. He wants to make you a greater blessing than you ever imagined, but you will have to go through circumstances and apparent disappointments and delays to be that blessing. So whatever God puts in front of you today, whatever he puts in front of you today, are you willing to accept it without wanting to change anything? Let's go to one last person. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a special child. He was different. We don't know exactly what those characteristics were, but the word beautiful here is, he was unique. There was something the parents recognized about this child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. We know that the Pharaoh had made a decree that all the male sons were to be thrown into the Nile. It says they weren't afraid. Why? Because they knew God had given them this knowing that there was something special about this child. And they kept him. They hid him for 3 months. Wonderful parents, Amram and Jochebed. They were not afraid of the king's edict. Verse 24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. We know the story of Moses. When he was too vocal to be hidden in the house, God prompted his mother to weave that basket and to place him there in the bulrushes on the edge of the Nile. She didn't know the outcome, but she was responsive to God's prompting. And she knew that what God was asking her to do had a purpose. And so she did what God prompted her to do, not knowing the outcome. Posted Miriam there to watch that basket. And we know the story. Hatshepsut came with her maidens down to the river. They saw the basket. And she immediately fell in love with this beautiful child. She didn't have children. She wasn't even married. And so Jochebed was commissioned to look after this child until he was of age. We're not sure exactly what that age was, but his mother poured her heart and soul into this child. The love of God was poured out on him. And it was God that transformed this child. Being in the presence of his mother, who lived in the presence of God, was transferred, was passed on to him. This attitude that when he grew up, here he was, raised in the lap of luxury, of power, of honor and glory, in the house of Pharaoh. The best of education, the best of everything. He could have grown up to be proud and arrogant and selfish. But he grew up in the presence of a mother who lived in the presence of God. And it says he refused. Here, he knew how to make a decision. He was a man of decision because he commanded the armies of Egypt. He knew what power and authority was. And he could discipline, he exercised that same discipline in his own life. It says he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He had a mother, and he was not going to allow someone else to be his mother. And that broke Hatshepsut's heart. She loved this son. Verse 25 says, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn might not touch them. It says, by faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Moses. What a man. He made a lot of mistakes. But does that matter to God? Are you willing to turn your mistakes over to God and let him correct them? Moses, as he grew up with his awareness that God had called him. He was special. That had been indelibly imprinted in his mind as a child growing up. His mother telling the story that God had a purpose and a plan for his life. He never lost sight of that. But being a determined person that he was, a commander, to be respected and to be obeyed, he again repeated the same sin of Abraham. He took matters into his own hands. He knew that God had a purpose for his life, but he was going to be a part of its fulfillment. He was going to do his part because why? He was familiar with power, with authority, with command. And so he allowed his humanness to be exercised. Says, so he stepped in that day when a Hebrew was being abused by an Egyptian, and when he couldn't bring any reconciliation, and there was not an immediate response of obedience to his authority, he took that responsibility upon himself to kill that Egyptian. Can you imagine yourself killing someone? I don't think Moses ever thought of himself killing someone. But he did. He did. The same thing can happen to us. If we dare allow our humanness to come in to this relationship with God. Because we know in the last days, your church members, your church family, will think killing you will be doing the will of God. Hard to believe, isn't it? And yet it will be. The church at Nazareth thought that they were doing the will of God in eradicating, in killing this man who dared to claim that he was the Messiah. And if you don't think the church will react in the same way, they're going to react to it just as they do when you proclaim to them that they can have the perfect character of Christ and must have that character, and that they can live the sinless, perfect life of Christ now. You announce that to the church and you will find out what the church is going to do with you. To dare to assume, to assert such possibilities. That's true. Moses made that mistake. Then the next day, when he saw two Hebrews fighting among themselves, he couldn't solve that problem either. But here's a man who God used. There's more to say about him in this chapter of faith than anyone else. He made terrible mistakes. And we may make mistakes too, but God is not interested in your mistakes. God is interested in your willingness to acknowledge Him. He's already died for your sins. He's covered your sins of the whole world. And God is asking for your heart. So no matter what you have done, God says, don't focus on what you've done. Focus on me. And Moses was given a responsibility more weighty, more overwhelming, with these 2 million cantankerous, griping, grumbling, complaining people out in that wilderness for 40 years. How would you like to have that responsibility? And he broke. He finally broke. And he took the honor of bringing the water out of the rock as if he had done it. And I want to end with this one last lesson. You know, we can become so familiar with sin that one little error, like a piece of fruit, or a one moment of impatience where we dishonor God, and we treat it as if it's something so insignificant that it doesn't matter. I can have that cup of coffee. I can speak impatient words. I can use a soft swear word. Whatever it is, Whatever it is, no matter how small it is, one piece of fruit will keep you out of the kingdom. It can. It can. There's nothing trivial with God. Sin is sin. But we live in a world where we trivialize sin and say it doesn't really matter. Well, there's one lesson that you have to learn. It does. Moses was called to lead Israel into the land of promise, and he never got there himself. Oh, we know the glorious end of his life. That's God's grace. Because Abraham repented. But it was that one casual, insignificant, unimportant little thing that kept him out of the kingdom. Is there something in your life today? Are you trivializing sin in some way in your life and saying, I'm just human? It's a lie, you know. It's a grand lie. I just want you to seriously consider where you are. Because God wants you to be a man, a woman of faith today. Learning the lessons from these men of the past who have much to teach us if we're willing to learn. But there is a grand life ahead of each one of us. We have no idea what God intends to do with us or through us today. We don't know. But we do know that God has a glorious future for us. Illustrated in the experience of Moses when God came and took him. And we know that he's in heaven today. And no matter what your mistake, what your error, what your faults may be, there is a God who wants to save you today, that you may live that perfect, sinless life, not in your strength and your power, by your willingness to accept his presence, to live it for you and through you. May God bless you. May you have a wonderful, blessed week.